himself has stated that climate action is at the heart of his government's mission for the protection and prosperity of Britain and the world. So with a decision finally looming on the Rosebank oil field, will the Prime Minister prove his words mean something and finally put an end to this climate-wrecking project?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I did notice that the Leader of the Opposition went to Scotland, I think, this week to announce that if she ever became Prime Minister, which is extremely unlikely, that she would pull down £50 billion of investment in renewables in Scotland. This is good, secure jobs of the future. Absolutely reckless behaviour. They haven't learned anything. But, I mean, the Greens, of course, have got a new leader, unfortunately for her. And we can now see what they really stand for. Withdrawal from NATO at a moment like this, totally unfunded spending that would blow up the economy. They would block all planning proposals. And they've now got a leader who's made, to say the least, some very strange comments about women. There is only one party delivering fairness and tackling the climate crisis, and that's the Labour Party.
Alex Selby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, in September 21, you met ex-Arsenal player Michael Thomas in Portcullis House alongside other former footballers of the V11 when I hosted them in Parliament. Last night, the BBC broadcast the V11 documentary exposing the fraud perpetrated against them and the financial abuse they have suffered within the footballing system. They have all suffered terrible financial loss, but HMRC are still chasing them for taxes from funds that were defrauded from them. Prime Minister, will you meet Michael Thomas and other players with me to see how we can protect victims of fraud and instead go after the perpetrators of fraud?
Prime Minister.
Well, I will, and I have met Michael Thomas a number of times. Of course, he's got a special place in my heart, having scored that winning goal at Anfield when we won the league, although the less said about winning at Anfield at the moment, probably the better. But the serious point is that these are sporting heroes who brought us so much joy, and they should have proper support from their sporting bodies on both health and welfare. Michael Thomas and others running a really important campaign to bring this to our attention. We do need a trusted system that takes the well-being of our sports people seriously, particularly those in vulnerable positions. And I know the Minister for Sport is in contact with the campaigners on this issue.
Ollie Glover.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On a recent visit to the UK Space Agency based in my Oxfordshire constituency, I learnt of the huge value created by our space sector, generating more than £7 for every £1 invested. Given his government's decision to scrap the UKSA as an executive agency, will the Prime Minister guarantee its international credibility, its operational independence and its budget? And will he visit Harwell campus to hear what our brilliant space companies need from government?
Prime Minister.
I thank him for raising this important issue and reassure him that we do want to keep the huge expertise and knowledge of the UK Space Agency staff, including those that are working in his constituency. We have already secured almost £300 million in contracts from the European Space Agency, and this will cut costs, reducing duplication, so we can really focus on growing this important sector.
Baxter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since the start of the full-scale invasion into Ukraine, Russia has stolen, abducted and indoctrinated at least 19,546 children.
Awful.
It's one of the most heinous crimes of this war. Can I warmly welcome this morning's announcement of an additional package of sanctions on those perpetrating these crimes? And can the Prime Minister assure the House that he will do everything possible to return these children to their homes?
Prime Minister.
Well, can I acknowledge her campaigning on this really important issue? Russia's policy of forced deportations, indoctrination of Ukrainian children is despicable, and anybody who's heard the stories or seen the pictures cannot be other than profoundly moved by it. We have taken firm action. Mr. Speaker, this was one of the issues that we discussed, as it happens, 2 weeks ago in Washington when I went over with other leaders to ensure that we are all putting maximum pressure. But this, amongst the very many horrors of the Ukraine conflict, this is right up there as one of the absolute worst.
Jack Rankin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Like many, I was deeply concerned that a police force deemed it necessary to take 5 armed officers to arrest a comedy writer from a flight. Some may have found Mr. Linehan's comments offensive, But that isn't the point. If you don't support speech you don't like, you don't support free speech. Will the Prime Minister commit to reviewing our speech laws to ensure the legitimate free expression is protected? And will he condemn the culture within the public sector which prioritises this dangerous and perverse nonsense?
Well, I thank you for raising this. You will have seen that the Commissioner has put out a statement in relation to the particular case this morning. I've been clear throughout, we must ensure the police focus on the most serious issues and the issues that matter most to our constituencies and all communities. And that includes tackling issues like antisocial behaviour, knife crime and violence. And we have a long history of free speech in this country. I'm very proud of that and I will always defend it.
Week where the Prime Minister has worked tirelessly to place the Clydeside, Glasgow, Govan at the epicentre of Type 26 shipbuilding. Is he perplexed, as I am, at the radio silence from the SNP and the contempt the SNP continues to show for the defence sector? And does he agree with me that that contempt is a contempt for jobs, it's a contempt for growth, and it's an 18-year-long contempt for Scotland?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, I am perplexed that the First Minister has not welcomed this. This is a massive deal for Scotland. It's 15 years of shipbuilding. I would have expected the First Minister to be holding a press conference to celebrate what we've done in relation to this deal. Those 15 years of shipbuilding, Mr Speaker, are extremely important to Clyde and very other industries, and they are a reflection of the professionalism and dedication of workers in Scotland that they've shown over many, many years. And I would urge the First Minister to come forward and welcome this deal.
Sir John Hayes, final question.
I know you will agree, Mr Speaker, that flags and banners in bringing national pride nourish individuals' sense of worth and nurture our shared sense of belonging. So will the Prime Minister take steps to ensure that across every part of our kingdom, alongside the Cross of St George in England, St Patrick in Wales, St Andrew in Scotland and the Red Dragon in Wales, that our flag is flown on every government and public building, hospitals, schools, police stations, railway stations? For every Briton deserves the chance to see a forest of flagpoles and the flutter of the Union Jack.
Prime Minister.
Well, can I thank him? And I share his pride in our country's flag. It represents our history, our heritage and our values. And that's why we display it. And I was the Labour leader that put the Union Jack on the membership card for the Labour Party. I'm very proud to do so. It belongs to all of us. We should be proud of it and value it.
That completes Prime Minister's questions. Let the plumb benches turn up. Point of order, John MacDonald.
Mr Speaker, I'm the chair of the PCS Trade Union Group in Parliament. As members will know, PCS members from our security division, the House's security division, are taking strike action today. These are professional, dedicated and committed staff. It takes a lot to motivate them to take strike action, their sense of grievance. There's a clear difference of view between the management of the House and the Union about how we've arrived at this situation. So could I use this mechanism to urge the senior management of the House to seek another meeting with the Union to clarify the situation and to come up with a reasonable offer that will resolve this dispute, because I do not wish to see our dedicated staff outside of work on this basis, because they provide us with the security we need.
Can I first of all say I thank the Honourable Member for giving notice of his point of order. Well, it's strictly not a point of order for the Chair. I would agree that it's in everyone's interest to work together to resolve matters, and I hope that we can get people round the table rather than striking. I don't want to go into further details, but I think it's better we leave it at this stage. Well, thank you very much. Right. Before we come to the 10-minute rule motion, I wish to make a short announcement about the House's sub judice resolution. A coroner's inquest has been opened into the death of Simone White, and those proceedings are now sub judice. However, given the significant public interest in addressing this matter, I, as Speaker, have decided to grant a waiver for the House's resolution relating to matters of sub judice in respect of any inquest into the deaths of UK citizens or residents from methanol poisoning overseas. Honourable members may therefore refer to the case in the course of proceedings, but I would urge them to avoid saying anything which might prejudice any future criminal or civil proceedings in the UK. I now call on Laura Trott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm grateful. I beg to move that leave be given to bring a bill to require travel assistance issued by the Secretary of State and other persons to include guidance about the risks of methanol poisoning and for connected purposes. Mr. Speaker, I've been working closely on this issue on behalf of one of my constituents, Chloe Lassiter, who, alongside her family, Sue, Neil, Tom and Amanda, have been fighting to raise awareness of the dangers of methanol poisoning abroad following the tragic death of Simone White last year. As members may have seen from media coverage at the time, Simone was travelling with her friend Bethany in Laos. They were staying in a small riverside town about 2 hours north of the capital. It is a hub for backpackers travelling across Southeast Asia. It was here that Simone and her friend consumed 3 shots of alcohol offered at the hostel. The next day, both felt unwell, but they carried on with their plans. Hours later, after boarding a bus to their next destination, things worsened. Bethany fainted, Simone vomited. They were eventually taken to a local hospital, but doctors had no idea what was wrong and initially suspected food poisoning. Still confused and deteriorating, the girls made it to a private hospital. I can't imagine how frightened and confused they must have been at this point. But sadly, by then, it was too late for Simone. She started having seizures during dialysis and was eventually taken for emergency brain surgery. The surgery relieved the pressure, but caused bleeding, and the other side of her brain started to swell. The results confirming methanol poisoning were not available until 2 weeks later, but by then, Simone had sadly already passed away. While Bethany did recover following her hospitalisation, 6 other young people fell victim to suspected methanol poisoning, having drunk at the same hostel. 2 young Australians, 2 young Danish women, and an American all lost their lives. As the Australian Prime Minister said in November, this is every parent's worst nightmare. And my heart goes out to all the families who lost loved ones in the most unbelievably of tragic circumstances. Over the last year, I've learnt so much about Simone, who was a much-loved young woman. She had a brilliant life ahead of her, and it was clear from when I attended her funeral that she was deeply loved by her friends and family. Mr. Speaker, a year ago, like so many of us here, I did not know much about methanol poisoning, yet over 1,000 people die from it every single year worldwide. This is such a huge danger, but barely any of us know about it. I also went backpacking after university, but never knew about the dangers. And sadly, the same is true of so many of our young people. This must change. So, for members less aware than we should be, methanol is tasteless and is only a faint smell, making it impossible to tell if a drink has been contaminated. But when consumed, it can lead to a coma, convulsions, blindness, nervous system damage, and death. Medical specialists say drinking as little as 25 millilitres of methanol can be fatal, but it's sometimes added to drinks because it is cheaper than alcohol. Since their devastating loss, Simone's family have campaigned tirelessly to prevent similar tragedies affecting other families. Alongside Simone's friend Bethany, they've been raising awareness of the dangers of methanol poisoning, and it was an honour earlier this year to help arrange a parliamentary drop-in session on the subject alongside the member for Orpington and the member for Dartford. The family were joined by representatives from the travel industry, the National Poisons Information Service, the British Toxicology Society and the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office to educate MPs, and the message was clear. Awareness saves lives, but only when government guidance is accurate, clear and consistent. Sadly, current official travel advice is falling short. In some high-risk countries, there is very little warning at all. Where advice does exist, it is vague and understated. Travellers are told that certain drinks might carry a risk or that they should exercise caution. Mr. Speaker, this is not a matter of caution. This is about a lethal and preventable danger. I appreciate that the Foreign and Commonwealth Development Office has updated the health section of the travel advice on its website, but we must do more to make the warnings clearer and more explicit so the information is more readily available to everyone. The government's Travel Aware website has an informative section on methanol poisoning, but more must be done to make that advice and guidance better known to young people before they travel. As things stand, you really do have to search for it to find it. My bill, supported by the members for Orpington, Dartford, Cheadle and Lewisham, proposes a straightforward and proportionate solution. It does not attempt to police alcohol sales abroad. It does not require costly programmes or enforcement. It simply requires the government to provide prominent, clear and consistent guidance about methanol poisoning for countries where the risk is known to exist. Other governments have already taken steps to warn their citizens. Australia's Smart Traveller service provides unambiguous practical advice and reaches young travellers through targeted campaigns. We should do no less, and we must not be left behind. Families like Simone's, who have endured unimaginable grief, are not asking for the impossible. They are asking for honesty, clarity, and actionable guidance so that other families do not have to suffer the same loss. We have already shown in this House that collaboration between families, experts, and parliamentarians can and does raise awareness. Now it's time to turn awareness into action. The Minister I know is well aware of Simone's story, and we've exchanged many letters on the topic. We were kindly hosted by the Foreign Office with the member for Orpington and the family earlier this year, and I thank them for their engagement to date, and I look forward to working with them as I know they understand the grave risks that are at stake. As Simone's mother, Sue White, said herself, if it can happen to Simone, it can happen to anybody. So let's today start the process to stopping future tragedies. I commend this bill to the House.
That the Right Honourable Member have to leave to bring in the bill. The question is that the Right Honourable Member have leave to bring in the bill. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Who will prepare to bring in the bill?
Gareth Bacon, Jim Dixon, Tom Morrison, Vicky Foxcroft and myself.
Laura Trott.
Methanol Poisoning Travel Advice Bill.
Second reading what day?
29th of May 2026.
29th of May 2026. Right. We now come to the Opposition Day motion in the name of the Shadow Chancellor on property taxes. I have to inform the House I have not selected amendments. We now come Sir Mel Stride, Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move the motion on the order paper. I trust you had a good recess, Mr. Speaker. I'm absolutely certain that the Deputy Prime Minister also had a good recess. We saw many photographs of her down at the seaside, just off the coast, in a rubber dinghy, rather like many of the other photographs that we've seen over the summer, given the reckless policies that this government has towards illegal migration. She was probably celebrating, Mr. Speaker, the acquisition of another property for her property empire, but perhaps also slightly tinged with that nagging doubt as to whether she had indeed paid enough stamp duty. Well, we will get to the bottom of that in due course. But those, Mr. Speaker, who could not avoid paying the taxes imposed by this government are businesses right up and down our country, many of whom I took the time during the recess to visit. In the leisure sector alone, some 80,000 jobs have been destroyed by national insurance, particularly affecting those taking their first job, younger workers, part-time workers, female workers, jobs being destroyed. And while the Deputy Prime Minister was lounging on her boat with her wine, of course this government was all at sea, like a cork bobbing on the tide, no control over the events that were swirling around them. And when it came to the economy, whilst eclipsed by the calamities around illegal migration, we saw the panicked reshuffle recently of the Treasury front bench. And I would like at this point, Mr. Speaker, to offer my congratulations to warmly welcome the Honourable Member for Chipping Barnet to his new role, but to tell him that he is joining a sinking ship in which the captain has just had all her authority stripped from her, and all his comrades down below deck are fiercely trying to bail out the situation. I'd also like to offer a fond farewell to the former Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Mr. Speaker, who no doubt thought he was very clever when he leapt off this sinking ship. But he won't be feeling quite so clever when he discovers that the place to which they have sent him is even more dysfunctional than the Treasury front bench. And over the summer, Mr. Speaker, amongst all this news of arrivals to our shores, we've had a cruel summer of speculation around tax. We've seen in those skies clouds of kites flown largely by the Treasury as to what taxes they are going to be putting up. It's all been tax, tax and tax. I'm reminded, Mr. Speaker, of the Beatles and the tax man. I'll tax the street. If you try to sit up, I'll tax your seat. If you get too cold, I'll tax the heat. If you take a walk, I'll tax your feet. When it comes to tax, Mr. Speaker, it's not so much good day sunshine as help. OK, it was a bit hammy, but it was worth a try. I was going to try, actually, Mr. Speaker, Penny Lane as well, but I drew the line at that. But, Mr. Speaker, it is worth examining how we got to this point, for a reckoning for our country is surely coming. This will be a story for all time. It started, I will momentarily, it started with broken promises. This was a party that said during the run-up to the general election that they had no intention of raising taxes left, right and centre, and yet within a month or two they did precisely that, with devastating consequences. Tax rises on businesses that stifled growth. They talked down the economy. They talked down the economy by confecting this £22 billion black hole that did not exist. And what irony that it was they that brought in the OBR to decide whether that £22 billion black hole existed, and it was the OBR themselves that said they could not legitimise that claim. They were wrong.
That's what he said.
And what happened with spending and borrowing? It got completely out of control. And the combination of passing on price rises because of the national insurance increases and the extra borrowing and spending has been higher inflation. We are an outlier, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to inflation, in a moment. And that in turn has seen interest rates higher for longer, and the servicing costs on our national debt now running at over £100 billion a year, that being over twice what we spend on defence. And I will give way to whoever it was behind me. Yes.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way. Would he agree with me that this loss of market confidence demands decisive action from the government at the budget to correct it? And that decisive action cannot solely be taken on the tax side, because the tax side is what driven us into this loop. We need decisive action on spending, and particularly on welfare, if we're to see some restoration of market confidence and to get ourselves out of this rut.
My right honourable friend, as ever, is absolutely right. The reality is, and you see it in the bond yields that there are at the moment, that the markets have no confidence in the ability of this government to actually get on top of spending. And we saw the farce of a government that came to office scrapping the £5 billion worth of welfare savings that were already baked into the OBR's scorecard because we had brought them in, attempting then to bring forward their own reforms and their own backbenchers then voting them down. This government does not have the will or the plan to deal with spending. And that is at the heart, and this is where my right honourable friend is so right, at the heart of the reason why we will all be punished and pay the price of more taxes come the budget in November. I'll give way to the
Mr. Speaker, can I commend the Shadow Minister for bringing this forward? The Shadow Minister has quite clearly shared the deep concern that I have, and I think everybody in this chamber should have, that government is considering further taxing property, despite that the Prime Minister committed to not impose capital gains tax on residents of this United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Last year it was a family inheritance tax. This year, those who own property, those who have skimped and saved to have their house, those middle class, those hard workers who have now become the latest target of Labour tax policy.
Well, the right honourable gentleman is entirely right. Of course, if you get into a situation where you are having to scrabble around and look at property taxes, as we will be debating this afternoon, then really nothing is safe from the taxman under this government. I think there was somebody else trying to intervene. Yes, give way to you.
Thank the honourable member for giving way. Could I gently remind him that since this Labour government came to power, interest rates have been cut 5 times. A vote of confidence in our Chancellor, fixing the foundations of our economy, saving an average family on an average tracker mortgage in my constituency over £100 a month. Can he remind me what happened to interest rates when his party was in power?
As the honourable lady will know, interest rates are one of the key tools in monetary policy, and they are applied to bring down inflation. And whilst there have been 5 reductions, and she is right, in the level of the base rate, there should have been many more reductions. And the reason is, the evidence is there, the reason is that this government has stoked inflation. We have inflation that is still been rising. It is at twice the level, or thereabouts, that it was on the day of the last general election. And when a government stokes inflation, you pay the price through higher interest rates, and that is precisely what has been happening. But yeah, I'll give way to
my right honourable friend, and he's right to highlight the massive impact of these tax rises on so many families up and down this country, and businesses too. Can he comment, please, on how we can have a Deputy Prime Minister in a government who has admitted avoiding paying the tax that she owed and continues in office, and this from a party which moved to call for the resignation of people for far lower offences than that, and as if not exposed the rank hypocrisy which seems to run right through the government opposite.
If the right honourable lady wants to make the rules, she should live by them. And that will be a message which will go out to businesses and families right up and down this country. There is no way that they can avoid the juggernaut of taxes that are coming down the track. I will give way to the right honourable gentleman.
And in return for his generosity,
in return for his generosity, I'm going to say something pleasant about the last Conservative government. I know, wait for it. And the last... wait for it, just the one thing. The last government allowed councils like Westmoreland Furness, run by the Liberal Democrats, to double council tax on second homes. It is right to do that because excessive second home ownership absolutely annihilates communities in the Lakes and the Dales, the West Country and elsewhere. Yeah. But can I encourage his party and the party in government now to do something we should do much more to limit the number of second homes than that, and that is to bring in a new planning category of use so that like the national parks and councils can manage the numbers and save communities.
Yeah. Well, I thank him for his intervention. I thank him for his kind words about the Conservative Party as well. I'm sure they're deeply felt and very, very genuine. What I would say, Mr. Speaker, is that what the Deputy Prime Minister should be doing is delivering more homes. And it is quite clear that the 1.5 million homes that they are claiming they will be delivering at the rate of 300,000 a year is not going to be met. And I'm quite happy at some point in the future to be proven wrong, but I very much suspect that unfortunately I will not be. But, Mr. Speaker, where we have ended up is in a situation where we have a huge black hole looming. The National Institute for Economic and Social Research puts that at possibly as much as £40 billion. This is a recurrent theme with the economic mismanagement of the party opposite. In the October budget, the first budget, there was headroom of around £10 billion against the fiscal rule. That was blown, and £4 billion more by the time of the spring statement, the emergency budget in the spring. And once again, it appears that even that, and considerably more, has been blown all over again. And that is no surprise when it came to the U-turn on winter fuel payments, when it came on to the U-turn on the welfare reforms that we've already discussed in this debate. That led to unfunded commitments of around £6 billion. Unfunded commitments that the Chancellor said the Labour Party would never find themselves in that situation. That has simply not happened. And what signal does it send to the markets that this government cannot control spending? And in the long term, it will be interesting to see what the ABR has to say about their forecasts for growth going forward. And we've seen 30-year bond yields now, Mr. Speaker, in recent times hitting a 27-year high. We are paying more on our borrowing than Greece. There is potentially now a debt crisis looming. This country could be on the brink, and it is all on their watch. I'll certainly give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
Of course, this government inherited higher bond yields than many other countries. And right now, bond yields are going up in Japan, Germany, United States. Is the Chancellor responsible for all of this?
Well, there's no doubt that under the last government there was a need to support the economy, and that, for example, involved the expenditure of £400 billion, not least on the furlough scheme, which, and I don't remember his party at the time saying that we shouldn't do that. They were actually arguing we should go still further than that. And this, the Conservative government stepped in and supported jobs and saved us going into the kind of mass unemployment that many feared, worse than even the 1980s. And I take great pride in that. But we are where we are now, and what this government should be doing is growing this economy, stoking up business sentiment, getting taxes down, and getting the economy moving. And it is doing precisely the opposite. I give way to my friend.
I'm grateful to the Shadow Secretary of State for giving way. And isn't the key point here, and the difference here, is that we are seeing stagflation, so high inflation and the economy not growing in the way in which it should be. Therefore, we are getting the job losses that we're seeing and unemployment going up every month under this Labour government. Unless the government does something drastically different, this is only going to get worse rather than get better, which impacts our growth prospects and therefore our prosperity, not only of our nation, but the individuals who work and try to thrive here.
Yeah. Right, my honourable friend is absolutely right. We're seeing high inflation, we're seeing anemic growth, we're seeing high gilt yields, we're seeing a pound that has been plummeting in recent times, and all of those are signals on the dashboard that are flashing red. Instead of getting a grip on spending and getting taxes down, this government has been out there pitch rolling yet more taxes. And over the summer, we have seen the briefings into the press have suggested tax rises on property. And the party opposite has an opportunity this afternoon to rule those possibilities out. And we should look to the Minister, when he responds, to do just that. Firstly, there has been the suggestion, Mr. Speaker, that there will be changes to private residence relief under the capital gains tax regime, something that would strike right at the heart of our country as a property-owning democracy, people being penalised simply for selling up and moving home. It would have clear implications for bunging up the property market. It would have clear economic implications for causing friction in the process of people moving from one part of the country to the other, often in search of work. And it would mean that where downsizing would be beneficial in providing more homes for people to live in, it would discourage that. Now, the Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, before the election, said that there never was a policy of this type, so it doesn't need ruling out. But let's rule it out in case anyone pretends that there was. So perhaps I could ask the Minister, when he responds, to confirm that he still stands by the words of the Prime Minister. Secondly, an annual tax on homes. What a tax on aspiration. What a tax on those people who have saved hard, managed to get onto the property ladder, and are then stuck with annual taxes. What about those who are asset rich but income poor and can't afford to pay them, and they're expected to sell up? Will the Minister, when he comes to the dispatch box, rule that possibility out and keep people's minds at rest? And if that was not enough, Mr. Speaker, we hear also that it may be that we'll be looking at changes to the gifting regime within inheritance tax. They're not content just to pulverise the farmers. They're not content just to pulverise the family businesses, seeing those businesses and farms broken up when they're passed on from one generation to another because of the imposition of the tax, something which, in fact, it was a Labour government back in the 1970s that brought in the reliefs that this government has now chosen to abolish. I will in just a second. Inheritance tax is going to double in terms of its yield over this Parliament. And we say enough is enough on this side of the House. We should not be punishing parents who wish to pass something on to their children. Socialists do not understand. We do not all stand as atomised individuals. We work together as families, as communities. We care about each other. We care about the people we love. And it is right that we have the opportunity to pass something on to them. And I give way to...
I thank the Shadow Chancellor and for bringing this debate as well. It's such an important issue. Properties and assets are vital to the country, to people in the country. But specifically on the lifetime limit for inheritance tax and passing on, everyone will have heard over the last year the government telling farmers, telling family businesses that they need to get their affairs in order, but they need to plan. The lifetime cap, the limit, not having a limit on the lifetime cap, was what allowed them to plan. If that is cut, if the cap is not in the right place, that negates every argument that the government have had in the last year as to why they think they could justify the family farm and family business tax. In responding, can the Minister please acknowledge this and rule out any change to that cap which will penalise these family farms and family businesses?
The Honourable Lady has put it brilliantly and succinctly. She is absolutely right. In their horror, in their recoil at some of the inheritance tax changes, that's exactly what farmers and family business owners have been doing. They've been thinking about the alternatives, and the 7-year rule has been exactly one of those alternatives. And it would be really heartless, an extraordinarily cruel moment if this government were now to shut that down as well. I certainly give way to my...
Very grateful to my right honourable friend, and he's explaining the situation in his usual powerful way. If, as seems likely, this government does impose capital gains tax on a person's principal private residence, will he then, as mitigation, consider whether there should be indexation allowance, at least, to provide some relief to the horror that I fear is about to be inflicted on my constituents. And my right honourable friend will remember that the Finance Act of 2008 abolished that relief on other property. I suspect The government will not be sympathetic to such a suggestion, given what happened in 2008, but at least it would take the edge off the imposition of taxes on the sale of a person's principal private residence.
Right honourable friend raises his point in his usual very eloquent manner, and that is a question for the Minister. And perhaps when the Minister rises to the dispatch box, he can hopefully rule out our concerns in their entirety. But in the event that he cannot, perhaps he would choose to answer the right honourable gentleman's inquiry. Is it not the case, Mr. Speaker, that there is a clear misunderstanding from the party opposite because they have no business experience? There is no business experience on the front bench of the government when it comes to setting up companies, understanding the meaning of business taxes. It's simply not there. And that Labour will, of course, be talking now about taxing wealth. Do they not understand that if you tax wealth, you will get less of it? It is estimated, Mr. Speaker, that around 15,000 high net worth individuals have left our country under the period in which this government has been in power. And a consequence of that is that the tax that just walked out the door will require something around 1/3 to 500,000 people on average earnings to make up the difference. It is not a case of good riddance to wealth, Mr. Speaker. It is a case of we should, as this party will, be the party that encourages and turbocharges it at every turn. If I'm an honourable friend, I will certainly give way. Thank you.
I'm sure Hansard will correct me. My honourable friend just made some comments around high net worth, high value individuals. I'm particularly interested in my constituency about individuals on low incomes, representing a city in Peterborough with one of the highest levels of 0 hours and chronically insecure work in the thing. Does he not agree that his party often wants all of the spending but none of the delivery for the funding to do that? He's talked about reducing taxation on some of the higher net worth. Could he also talk about which doctors' surgeries in my constituency would receive cuts under his plans, which individuals would receive no protection from employment rights, and how the people of Peterborough will be worse off because he wants to reduce the spending which will fix the foundations of this country?
Well, the honourable gentleman refers to spending and cutting spending. His party attempted to cut spending, of course, and entirely failed to do so. And my point is, if he wants money to spend on public services, he does need, the honourable gentleman should worry about cutting welfare. And I don't know how the honourable gentleman voted when it came to putting that to the test in this House. But if he in any way voted against his own government and getting on top of the welfare bill, then he should ask that his question of himself. When it comes to, when it comes to those on low incomes, they are precisely the people who are being devastated now by the national insurance increase. Because what we know is it's not just an increase in the rate, it's been a substantial reduction in the threshold at which national insurance now kicks in. And that has meant higher unemployment, particularly amongst younger workers, amongst part-time workers, amongst women, amongst people getting that vital first job so they can get themselves on a career path. They are the people that his government is punishing most. And I give way to my honourable friend.
I'm grateful to the Shadow Chancellor for giving way. And isn't this exactly the point, that 1% of income tax is paid for by the, 1% of the top earners pay almost 30% of income tax. So if we lose those people, we damage the very people who need the support and the investment from the very taxpayers that we've just scared off. Shouldn't the reverse be happening? The reverse happen. We attract more people into this country to spend more money, to be able to have more money for those services through tax collection.
Yeah, the honourable gentleman is absolutely right, and I have already shared with the House, Mr. Speaker, that classic example of the number of people who have left this country because of a punitive tax regime and the cost that it leads to. I will give way to my right honourable friend and then to the...
my honourable friend's... Thank you. To further to my honourable friend's excellent point, that the party opposite denigrate
wealthy individuals that choose to come to this country, it's not just the tax that they provide, it's the jobs and opportunities they create by investing in constituencies up and down the country. This country has prospered for hundreds of years by being open and welcoming to inward investment. If we lose that, we lose a key plank of the competitiveness and growth that we have associated with our economy.
Right, we live in a highly mobile world, Mr. Speaker. It is quite easy for people with substantial wealth or money to invest to go anywhere in the world. We have to remain competitive, and this government is making us less competitive. Now, my right honourable friend mentions unemployment. Just look at the record. Should we really have expected any more from this government? No, not really. Every single Labour government in history has left unemployment higher when they left office than it was at the time that they came into office. And what have we seen on unemployment since this government's been in office? It's increased every single month since they've been in power. I give way to the honourable lady.
I thank him for giving way. He has spent the last 5 minutes circling around figures gathered by a consultancy that aids the super wealthy to migrate from this country. So I ask him, where is the Conservative Party getting its economic ideas from? Because it speaks volumes that he has spent so much of this point speaking for the 15,000 high net worth individuals who are served by that consultancy. The previous point speaking about inheritance taxes, which is only paid by 4% of all estates in the UK. What will the Conservative Party do, if he has any ideas, to grow the economy for the benefit of all people in this country?
The honourable lady asked where we're getting our ideas from. Where we are not getting them from are academics and researchers who believe in taxing wealth and who are now sitting there on the Treasury front bench or in places where they're advising elsewhere in and around number 10, and who talk on a regular basis about taxing property and taxing wealth and taxing shares and taxing assets of any description that they can think of. That is the road to ruin. And she asked where we get our ideas. I'll tell her where we get our ideas from. I set up my own business in the 1980s from absolutely nothing. And I grew it from scratch. And then I took it over to America and I grew a business there. And I have lived, breathed and eaten business most of my life. And I go up and down the country and I speak to those businesses, and they are the people that understand what needs to be done on the tax front. They're the people that have to live with the red tape that her party is bringing in to tie them down. So they're the people that this party is listening to. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way. He has talked at great length about about taxing the wealthy. He's omitted one of the suggestions that has come forth over the summer, which is getting rid of the punitive council tax system that taxes poverty and deprivation in this country. The former Conservative leader of Hartlepool Borough Council famously cheered when he put up council tax on deprived people in Hartlepool. Why is the Conservative Party, and now Reform as he's defected to Reform, so attached to this regressive system?
Mr. Speaker, I think all systems like council tax or different variants on it and revaluations and things are things that government should look at, because we don't want them to be entirely static and they're always there for reform and change. But I would just observe that when it comes to the level of council tax to which the honourable gentleman referred, if you take the average council tax paid in Labour areas, it is demonstrably higher than the equivalent taxes in Conservative areas. And that comes down to the approach that a Conservative council takes to spending, to making sure councils are efficiently run, and the profligate approach of the party opposite. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
I thank the honourable member for giving way. One of the suggestions this government heard earlier this year was from Conservative-run Hampshire County Council, who suggested that they increase the council tax of my constituents by 15%, which was blocked by this government and the Secretary of State. Will he join me in condemning that proposal by the Conservative-run Hampshire County Council to increase council tax by 15%?
We're not going to get into specific things going on in his area. Why would I be expected? Why would I be expected to opine with authority on something relating to his constituency of that nature? But my general point, hold on, my general point stands that it is a simple fact that Labour-controlled local authorities charge more for council tax than Conservative-run councils. I'll give way to the honourable lady.
Can I just say that, please, you can't just hang up in the air. If she's going to give way, please. Emily Darlington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In fact, that is not a fact. The reality is, in my region, Milton Keynes, the Labour-run local authority, has lower taxes than all the surrounding Tory authorities, including Northamptonshire, which has failed over and over again. Now two Conservative, now Reform councils that have failed, and Buckinghamshire. Milton Keynes has been labelled by the LGA as one of the best-run councils and still delivers lower council tax than all those Tory-run authorities.
The point of, as a simple matter of logic, even if the honourable lady's assertion were true, and I don't know whether it's true or not, it does not actually contradict the point that I made, and that is the point. Now, is there somebody that was waiting? Yeah.
Chancellor, just say, wasn't it that this Prime Minister currently who said not a penny more on council tax when he came through? Is the Shadow Chancellor aware of how that worked out?
In a word, badly. Anyway, yes, the honourable gentleman. Yeah.
I did just want to return to the point the honourable member made a moment ago. He suggested he's not going to get into speculation. I mean, this whole debate is premised on media speculation, and yet I'm asking the honourable member to comment on an actual proposal that was made to the government to increase local council tax for my constituents by 15% by a Conservative-run county council. So he asked us to vote on media speculation, but he won't comment on an actual proposal.
The point is, Mr. Speaker, very clear, and I think I do need to now start to make some progress as well, and have been fairly generous in taking interventions, is, as I say, that when it comes to council tax, it is a fact that Conservative-controlled councils charge less. And they do that because their whole approach to running the council, as ours is in terms of our approach to running an economy, is to make sure it's done efficiently, and we do not impose undue burdens on people by way of tax. But, Mr. Speaker, we were told when it comes to tax by the Chancellor back in that first budget in the autumn that those tax hikes were a once-in-a-Parliament event. It's now not a question of whether there will be further tax increases. It's a question of which taxes. And the uncertainty that has flowed from this disastrous situation over the summer has meant that there has been a hold on businesses investing, on property transactions, on choices, and in many ways, in a fundamental way, on some of the freedoms, actually, that we as citizens take often for granted. And that is because of Labour's choices. Mr. Speaker, the party opposite will desperately dismiss all of this as press speculation, and I expect to hear that from the Minister in a moment. But it's not the truth that this sorry tale is entirely of their own making. The inevitable result of their choices and the failure that has followed, with much of this speculation seeming to be fuelled by briefings from within government itself. This House, Mr. Speaker, and the public deserve answers. The Chancellor cannot borrow more and has shown no ability to control spending. That can only leave tax. But which taxes will it be? Are family homes safe, or are they simply fair game? Mr. Speaker, if the Labour Party failed to vote for the simple motion we have before us today, then it will be clear what the answer is. Under this Labour government, nothing is safe. Not your home, not your pension, not your savings, not your business, not your farm, not that which you simply wish to pass on to your own children. The message to hard-working people up and down our country could not be clearer. Labour will always duck the hard choices. They will tax the living daylights out of your family's future to pay for their failure.
Sorry? I hope somebody wasn't saying hypocrisy. I'm sure it wasn't the case. The question is, as on the order paper, I now call the Chief Secretary. Congratulations on your promotion, James Perry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the Right Honourable Member for Central Devon for opening this debate. I can see he spent his summer polishing some of his rhetorical flourishes, which he's shared with us today. He maybe could have spent his time rather better, I would suggest. But, Mr. Speaker, thank you for your words of congratulations. It's a real honour to be here as Chief Secretary to the Treasury. And may I put on record my tribute to my predecessor, the now Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister, for all of his fantastic work, notably delivering the spending review, and to welcome my friend, the Exchequer Secretary to the Treasury, to his new role. It is a role that I thoroughly enjoyed myself, and I'm sure he will be excellent in that role. Now, Mr. Speaker, honourable members opposite will appreciate that the motion itself, as they have tabled before the House today, is one that simply cannot form the basis itself for a specific debate on individual tax measures. Members across this House will know that the government does not respond to speculation in advance of a budget, which the Chancellor has today announced will take place on November the 26th. This has long been the case, Mr. Speaker, and the Right Honourable Member for Central Devon knows it well, and he knows it would be irresponsible to engage in that speculation. So, Mr. Speaker, whatever political rhetoric he and his colleagues will use in today's debate, and no matter how many variants of the same questions we hear in today's debate, I know that he will understand that I cannot engage with speculation about individual tax measures ahead of the budget.
For the Right Honourable Gentleman for giving way. He says that he will not speculate, he cannot speculate on individual tax messages. Will he then deny that the number 11 machine has not been leaking these stories to the national press over the summer?
Mr. Speaker, I am not going to engage in speculation or any of the mechanics around that. And the honourable member, and indeed all honourable members opposite, will simply have to wait until November the 26th to see the specifics of the budget at that point. And at that point, I'm sure he and his colleagues will have plenty to say. I'll give way.
By genuinely congratulating the new Chief Secretary to the Treasury, and I've always found him an honest and straightforward Speaker in the House. I think he deserves his position. On that point, not on a point of speculation, can he confirm reports that the government is looking again at welfare? Because surely he will agree with me that in any process of fiscal consolidation, one must look to tax rises and to spending cuts. There's been a lot of reporting about there being further measures on welfare. Yes or no, will there be further measures on welfare under consideration?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Right Honourable Member for his kind words. But as you will know, there are already welfare measures both going through Parliament and being investigated by my Right Honourable friend in the Department for Work and Pensions through the review that he's undertaking. So this government is determined to make sure that the safety net is there for people who need it, but that people who can work have the support they need to get and maintain a job. Now, I will give way.
Giving way. What isn't speculation is that the largest rise in property taxes happened under the Conservatives when Liz Truss crashed the economy and increased interest rates for everyone in my constituency. But will the Minister, on a point of principle, speak to the fact that there are different parts of the country with different house prices, and that must be reflected in Treasury thinking when it comes to thinking about tax and the budget this year?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The honourable gentleman is, of course, absolutely right to remind everyone of the record under the short-lived Prime Minister Liz Truss when the people opposite were in power. I noticed they don't refer to that themselves when evaluating the economic situation, but it is something the British people will not forget. And to his wider point around housing across the country, what we want to do, Madam Deputy Speaker, is to ensure that we are building homes, affordable homes, in every part of this country. And that is why one of the priorities of this government has been to reform the planning system to enable the building of 1.5 million homes, to make sure that every community has those homes, that people have homes they can afford to live in the area where they grew up, where they live, and where they want to go to work. And that is the central mission of this government. I will give way one more time, then I'll make some progress.
thank you very much for giving way. As just pointed out there, but the government is hoping to build all those new homes, obviously with the intent that they recognise how important a home is to someone, the value of a home to a family. On that, and on the principle, because obviously he's said he won't talk on the specifics, but on the principle of that, does he therefore recognise that taxing people's homes is something that we really should not be pursuing if we are a country truly that values home ownership?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I gently remind the honourable member that council tax exists in this country, which is, of course, a tax on properties of some sort. So the principle of having some taxes applied to property is well established in the UK and has been for some time. But the honourable lady is trying to tempt me to engage in more speculation. As I said in my remarks earlier to the right honourable member for Central Devon, I'm not going to engage in speculation about what may or may not be in the budget, because, Madam, I'll give way to my honourable friend.
I thank the Minister for giving way. He's always very generous with his time, and I congratulate him on his well-deserved promotion. The party opposite are not a fan of tax, but say they're also not a fan of actually supporting public services. Under their government, thousands of HMRC compliance officers, including my mum, were made redundant, and actually we weren't able to collect the amount of tax that actually people owed. Is that partly why we've got such a black hole in finances that this government inherited?
A few colleagues hoping to contribute. Intervention should be short, and the Minister should be aware of that, considering how much longer he may wish to contribute himself.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Hint taken on that. I thank my honourable friend for his intervention, and may I thank his mother for her service to HMRC in the past, because people at HMRC do an absolutely critical job in collecting the tax, which is important to fund our public services and to make sure our economy functions effectively. And one of the priorities we've had as a government is to close the tax gap, which existed under the previous government. And indeed, at the budget last year and the spring statement earlier this year, we set out plans to raise an additional £7.5 billion in additional tax revenue as a result of hiring people to do those really important jobs, as well as investing in new technology and modernising the service to make sure that people pay the tax that they owe. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm going to make some progress because I said I would a few moments ago, and I've been gently reminded by Madam Deputy Speaker that I really must live to my promise on that front. Madam Deputy Speaker, there are questions which the Right Honourable Member for Central Devon is asking today, and he asked in his opening remarks, and his colleagues with their sheets from the whips have been dutifully following up on in their comments as well, but they are matters which we cannot talk about today. There are, of course, other important facts which he does not want to talk about, but which the British people have not forgotten. The £22 billion black hole in our public finances, which the previous government hid from the light. The disastrous mini-budget, which caused damage to households across the country and to our reputation around the world. Stalled housing, unfinished infrastructure, public services brought to their knees by underinvestment and disinterest. They do not want to talk about these things, Madam Deputy Speaker, because, of course, they are the legacy of the last government. And we just found out today that the Right Honourable Gentleman does not even want to talk about things happening by Conservative councils, as my honourable friend, the member for Basingstoke, raised so importantly in his contribution earlier. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, now they are in opposition, his party and those in Reform are talking Britain down. They want to claim that Britain is broken. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, I believe that Britain is unbreakable. Our country is full of potential, home to hard-working people, brilliant businesses, world-leading universities and research institutions, cultural giants, and the promise that if you work hard and contribute to the country, it will be a place where you can succeed. Yet undeniably, Madam Deputy Speaker, after 14 years of Tory mismanagement, far too many working people feel that the economy is stuck. I hear from constituents, I've been asked by Madam Deputy Speaker to make some progress, so I'll return to the honourable gentleman a little later. I hear it from my constituents, Madam Deputy Speaker, as I'm sure many other people in this chamber do. They tell us that no matter how much effort they put in, no matter the effort they put in at work, the careful management of household finances and the diligent efforts to save for a brighter future, they do not yet feel they are getting enough in return, and it has become harder to get ahead. At the same time, our roads and railways seem slow and less reliable, and our classrooms seem fuller, whilst the NHS has a massive backlog. The root cause of all this is the chronic underinvestment by the previous government. That underinvestment over many years has slowed our productivity growth to a rate not seen since the Napoleonic Wars. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, members opposite... I'll give way.
Can I thank the Minister very much for giving way? Would he agree with me that thanks to the tight fiscal rules that this government has introduced and the changes in the budget, my residents in Dartford since the election have seen an investment in the Lower Thames crossing, something that they've wanted for 15 years and wasn't delivered under the last government, a £25 million hospital rebuilding project at Darrant Valley, and a structures fund, a £1 billion DFT structures fund, which will repair the ruined Galley Hill Road in my Dartford constituency. It's only thanks to the government's rules and its budget changes that we see these changes. Is that not right, the Minister?
Yeah. I thank my honourable friend for his intervention, and he's absolutely right that it is only thanks to the fiscal rules which the Chancellor introduced at last year's budget and our decisions, the right decisions, to make sure those fiscal rules are non-negotiable and that we keep to them at every stage. It is only because of those decisions that we have been able to boost investment by £120 billion over the course of this Parliament in many of the projects, including those which he mentioned and those in constituencies right across the country. And that is the right thing for our country. We were just talking about chronic underinvestment. We are tackling that, both through making sure that the government invests across the country and that we encourage private sector investment to get businesses across Britain growing. A very short one, and then I really will make progress.
Thank you very much. Would the Minister agree that taxation is intrinsically linked to economic growth and there already are green shoots of recovery in the economy with 3 trade deals and 5 interest rate cuts? Thank you.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for her intervention, and she's absolutely right that critical to our plans is, of course, economic growth. She pointed to the trade deals we secured, and of course she will know, as other honourable members will also, that the UK was the fastest growing G7 economy in the first half of this year. So there is much more for us to do, but we are showing that because of the right decisions that we have taken, we are starting to move in the right direction. I'm going to make... Oh, I probably should. OK, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'll give way one more time, then I promise. Very generous.
I don't want him to speculate, but I do want him to consider. But I do want him to consider something. And we talked about people not paying taxes. A significant minority of second homeowners in my constituency let their property out for just a few days a year, and as a result can claim to be a small business, pay no council tax, and pay no business rates. So people working on the minimum wage in my constituency are subsidising those people to pay no council tax at all. Will he change that situation to protect our communities?
I think I should congratulate the Right Honourable Gentleman for an inventive way of encouraging me to speculate on tax measures. I can say to him that I'm aware of the issue which he points to, and I thank him for raising it in this context, but of course I'm not able to make any decisions on taxation at the dispatch box today. Madam Deputy Speaker, going back briefly to the broader context, because it's absolutely crystal clear, both from the Right Honourable Gentleman's opening remarks and indeed what all of his colleagues have been saying so far, that members opposite are still in total denial about any responsibility they have for the situation the country finds itself in. They act as if being behind the wheel for 14 years is irrelevant to where we find ourselves now. It may be that they think that if they don't talk about it, the British people may forget the last government's responsibility for getting us into the current situation. But the British people know that the Conservatives did this to our country, and that is why, at the last election, they put our faith in us. And whilst there is clearly more to do to bring down inflation and the cost of borrowing, it is also clear, Madam Deputy Speaker, that we have turned a corner by taking the right decisions for our country. We have taken the decisions to address the black hole in the public finances, to fix our foundations, and to clear up the mess we inherited from the previous government. And as a consequence, as I mentioned a moment ago, in the first half of this year, we were the fastest growing economy in the G7. We outpaced France, Germany, Japan, and the United States. Since taking office, this government has welcomed around £100 billion in investment into the UK, with 384,000 jobs being created over the same period. We have cut red tape and changed planning regulations to deliver 1.5 million new homes over the course of this Parliament, and already nearly 100,000 new homes on large developments that were previously stuck in the planning system, or which were simply not progressing as fast as they should be, are now being given the support they need to make that progress quickly. In just over a year, Bank of England has cut interest rates 5 times, a fact that means that someone on a tracker mortgage of just over £200,000 will be around £100 a month better off. And crucially, Madam Deputy Speaker, real wages have risen more in the time since the last election than they did in the first 10 years of the previous government. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, the choice at the next budget is clear. Over 14 years, the last government made wrong choices time and again. Their many prime ministers and their many chancellors all embraced a cycle of austerity, debt and decline. We will never repeat that. We will continue to invest in Britain's renewal, using every power at our disposal to drive forward an economy that works for working people. And as I said, Madam Deputy Speaker, the government does not respond to speculation, especially ahead of a budget. And in any case, we're not writing a budget this far out. The budget the Chancellor delivers in November will be carefully considered and designed to get the balance right between making working people better off, raising enough money to fund our public services, and to get the country moving once again through investment and growth. And of course, it will undergo proper scrutiny from the OBR. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I was going to briefly address the taxes which are in the motion, but I suspect I should skip over this part of the speech. I'm getting a gentle indication from you that I have come to the right conclusion there. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, to conclude, if we are to get this country moving again, then investment, both from businesses and from government, is essential. We must therefore strike the right balance in our tax system so that we can put more money in the pockets of working people while supporting the private sector to invest and grow and funding our public services. Members on both sides of the House will have their own views on what that right balance is, and I look forward to hearing those views today, and may I thank all honourable and right honourable members in advance for their contributions.
And before I call the Liberal Democrat spokesperson Daisy Cooper, all backbenchers will be on a time limit of 4 minutes. That's 4 minutes. And I call Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and may I start by adding my voice and that of my party to others who have welcomed the honourable member for Chipping Barnet to the front bench. Madam Deputy Speaker, property taxes in this country, like so many other things, are broken and are hopelessly out of date. Council tax is regressive. Stamp duty is a transaction tax that slows growth, and business rates are a tax on bricks and mortar that bears no relationship whatsoever to the amount of money that a business might make. I have to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, that it is quite extraordinary, I think, that the official opposition have chosen to debate property taxes, given that I can barely remember any discussion at all in the last Parliament about things that they wanted to tackle, and they particularly didn't tackle any of those three. So if it is true that the Labour government is now thinking about biting the bullet and looking at bringing forward fairer alternatives to these, then I commend them for looking at this issue. But I would caution the government. We do not want to see a repeat of the jobs tax fiasco. Going after property simply as a Treasury tax grab would be a disaster if the government does not set out a broader vision for housing as a whole and for property taxation. Now, we agree with parts of the Conservatives' motion today. We agree with their call to rule out capital gains tax on primary residences. In the general election, we Liberal Democrats set out a way of reforming capital gains tax in a way which would be fairer. It would reduce capital gains for 2/3 of people already paying it, it would increase it for the super wealthy, and it would have raised more revenue than from the measures, the carte blanche measures that the Labour government have pursued. So we agree with that. We also agree with the Conservatives that the property levy, as has been described in newspapers, would be a disaster. It would choke up the housing market, it would stop people from downsizing, it would slow economic growth. And so I hope that if ministers are indeed considering any of these things, that they look at the reaction of... I would give way.
In my constituency of Henley and Tame, the average house price is £515,000. Would she agree with me that the property tax, as described by the government so far, would in fact be a tax on the South East and London?
I absolutely agree with my honourable friend, and he will know, as I do in my own constituency of St Albans, that there are many people who have spent decades and decades and decades living in their property. They might have bought it for a few £1,000s. Now it may be worth a huge amount, but they might be asset rich and cash poor. And for people in those situations in particular, they are incredibly scared at reports that they have seen in newspapers about a potential tax, as has been described. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, there are parts of the Conservatives' motion that we agree with. However, we are open to the idea in principle of a land value tax, because land value taxes can, in principle, create more fairness in the system, and they can produce a more efficient use of land. But of course, the devil is always in the detail, and so it would depend on the design of any particular land value tax and any exemptions that might be introduced. We Liberal Democrats have set out policies before about how we would replace the broken business rates system and replace it with a commercial landowner levy. This is an example of how the principle of land value could be applied to commercial land. It's potentially
Will my
also...
right honourable friend give way?
I will give way.
Thank you. Many tourism industry businesses in Torbay raise concerns around Airbnb and their impact both on safety and legality. Surely the government should be publishing their long-awaited short-term let registration scheme with a matter of urgency. Thank you.
I absolutely could not agree with my honourable friend more. I absolutely would love to see this registration programme, but we Liberal Democrats have repeatedly said that that is only the first step. Registration is actually something that the Airbnb-type platforms want to see because it actually enables them to go and pinch properties from other platforms. It doesn't solve the problem, which we have, of lots of additional homes being used for Airbnbs, but not being used by young people and, in fact, anybody who wants to be able to rent a property in their area. And it's important that local authorities have the power to get the balance between tourism and having the people they need in their local area who can afford to live there.
On that point, she might give way.
I will give way.
Yeah, I'm really grateful to her for giving way, and she makes an extremely good point there. In my constituency, we have seen a collapse of the long-term private rented sector, which has pushed hundreds of people in our communities out of our communities, not able to contribute or be part of the workforce or send their children to our schools. An answer, surely, is to be able to create short-term lets as a separate category of planning use, just as we're calling for with second homes. That would allow councils and national parks to make sure there's enough homes for local people to live in.
Again, I agree with my honourable friend, and I will recall, as I'm sure he does, that in the previous Parliament there were a number of amendments that we had tabled to pieces of legislation that the Conservatives had tabled, where we Liberal Democrats had tried to make that happen, but unfortunately they were not accepted by the now official opposition. Madam Deputy Speaker, going back to land value tax, it's also, in principle, something that could help with land banking. Now, all of us in this House say that we want to build on brownfield first, but of course part of the problem is that big developers can land bank, and we Liberal Democrats have repeatedly tried to table amendments or introduce new laws to ensure that local authorities can buy that land at the land value rather than at the hope value by changing the way that our legislation works. So I think there are, in principle, some merits to at least considering a land value tax. But of course, as I say, the devil will be in the detail. And if the government does bring forward any proposals, we will scrutinise them closely when they do. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, there is a couple of major omissions in the official opposition's motion. One is on business rates, as I've already outlined. Business rates are, in fact, a property tax facing small businesses. The business rates is a broken system. We've heard repeated promises from the previous government and now this one about fixing business rates. And it's incredibly disappointing that as yet we have not seen the ambition to replace business rates as a system, instead tinkering around the edges and under the current government's proposals potentially making them a little bit worse and targeting hospitality in particular. But another major omission is giving local authorities those real powers to regulate the location and the number of short-term lets, particularly as they affect people in the southwest, Cumbria and many other areas. I will give one.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Queen Camel Community Land Trust is working to create much-needed homes in South Somerset, but they're often hampered by access to finance and an outdated planning system. So does my honourable friend agree with me that this government should focus on community-led development to deliver the much-needed affordable homes, homes that the community will actually appreciate and they want in their areas?
I absolutely agree with my honourable friend. Today we're discussing property taxation, but of course taxation on its own, without a broader vision for property, may well lead us down the track of having the same kind of jobs tax fiasco that we've had before. And there absolutely should be a community-led planning system rather than the top-down planning system that we've had under the previous government and under this one too. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I know in my own constituency of St Albans, just to finish, that this particular issue of Airbnbs is a real problem. Under a previous Conservative housing secretary, there was the approval for offices to be turned into blocks of flats, but no powers were given to local authorities to control how that could happen. And that now does mean that in my constituency, many young people can't actually, if they get a job in my constituency, they can't afford to have that job unless they're living with mum and dad. They can't afford to even rent a place, let alone even get on the housing ladder in the first place. And so it is absolutely essential that the government comes forward not only with the registration scheme for short-term rentals, but give local authorities the real powers to regulate the number and the location of Airbnbs so that we can get that balance right between getting homes for young people and for people wanting to live in an area where they work, with having tourism on the other hand. I'll leave it there. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
I have to notify the House, in accordance with the Royal Assent Act 1967, that the King has signified his royal assent to the following acts: Universal Credit Act 2025, Armed Forces Commissioner Act 2025. And I call Emily Darlington.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I appreciate the opportunity to speak in this debate, and I wanted to take on the challenge that the Shadow Chancellor said about, let's talk about how we got to this point and the devastating consequences of that. Well, let's start first with, despite 27 tax rises under the last government, government debt rose from 60% of GDP under them to 100.5% of GDP. They were borrowing for day-to-day spending. And he talks about unfunded commitments. Well, we know about unfunded commitments because that was the £22 billion black hole that they left of unfunded commitments. And he says that property ownership is something he really cares about. But they were responsible for 6% fall in home ownership of people aged between 25 and 34 under his watch. This government is building 1.5 million new homes, including record numbers of council housing and social properties, as well as renter rights reform, as well as looking into mortgage reform. This is a fair and more affordable housing mix for all. And when we talk about what drove that fall in people owning homes, young people owning homes, we have to look at inflation. Inflation peaked at 11.1% under the last government, Conservative government, almost hitting Margaret Thatcher's record of 17%. High interest rates seem to be something the party opposite is very comfortable with. In 2022, food inflation hit a 45-year high. And in 2023, the UK recorded the highest inflation rate in Western Europe, the only country to have double-digit inflation. But under this government, in only a year, we have had 5 interest rate cuts. And the real cost of that can be found in the number of children living in poverty. There was a 20% increase in child poverty between 2014 and 2024. Food bank demand rose by 3,772% under the Conservative government. In 2010, approximately 2.3 children living in relative poverty. In 2024, that was 4.5%. That is shameful. It was the biggest fall in living standards on record, and it is now under this government that wages are finally rising faster than prices. And we have seen the results of those cuts in spending, particularly in areas like youth services, where they had a 73% real terms cut under the last government, and it's this government that's putting £88 million back into youth clubs. Is that what you want to cut? Finally, I want to talk about businesses. The Shadow Chancellor stood up there and said there was nobody on this side of the House that had experience in starting a business, running a business and growing a business. Well, I, for one, have done that. So have many people on this side of the chamber. He should get to know his colleagues before he makes those assertions. 300...
Peter Fortune.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. After a summer of rumoured tax rises, my constituents are deeply concerned. They're already paying more because Labour broke their promise to freeze council tax, because they broke their promise not to increase national insurance, because they broke their promises to first-time buyers, small businesses and farmers. Thanks to Rachel Reeves' anti-business policies, growth forecasts are collapsing, borrowing costs are sky high, and our national finances are shot. Instead of looking at their reckless decisions, Labour are now calculating the best way to raise taxes. And my constituents are now worried that the Chancellor is eyeing up their family home.
Absolutely.
On the edge of Greater London, homes in Bromley and Biggin Hill are expensive. Yes. The average house price is well over £500,000. And rumours that the government may scrap the private residence relief would be devastating. It would slap my constituents with an average £33,000 tax bill when they sell their family home. And if someone's scrimped, if they've saved, if they've been lucky enough to see the value of their home go up, they shouldn't be handed a punitive tax bill. It only serves to knock working people back down when they are trying to get ahead. Of course I'll give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Residents in Bromley, like in Bexley, would have also been hit by the Mayor of London's 77% increase in his share of council tax since he took office, alongside various other driving taxes. Does he agree with me that this increase in property taxes would be the final straw that broke the camel's back for many residents?
Thank you very much. And I do agree that the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, is causing residents in Bromley and in Bexley real financial hardship. However, I in absolutely no way believe that this is the final straw that the Mayor of London can find to damage my constituents and yours. I'm sure he's got plenty more straws and a lot more camel that he'd like to lay them on. As I was saying, this irresponsible policy would be economically ruinous. Imagine if somebody bought a house in Bromley in 2010 for £3,500. Today it would cost somewhere in the region of £550,000. If they wanted to move to a new area for work or to be closer to family, without that relief, the tax bill would be somewhere in the region of £50,000. And that's an eye-watering bill which stops people moving and wrecks the housing market. And that's why I urge others here today to support the motion which rules out any further reckless tax rises.
Hear, hear.
Working people cannot afford to keep bailing out Labour. Thank you.
Mark Ferguson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And it's wonderful, really, to be back for another Opposition Day debate. I'm sure we can all agree. Another debate about thank you very much, everyone. A debate about imagined proposals. And it must be difficult for members' office because for so many years this would have been the time of the year that they would have been preparing for their conference, preparing for the budget. But of course, they're not writing the budget anymore, and there will be scant attention paid, I'm sure. As my honourable friend, thank God they are not writing the budget because, as I will come on to, we've seen what their budgets have led to. But I understand the frustration. But it's nice to see they've settled into the most comfortable aspect of being in opposition. And as I've said before in some of these debates, as a Labour Party member of many years standing, I have a huge amount of experience of the comfort of opposition, because you start to be able to create straw men of what the government might be doing. You talk about the fears that you have. You rile up a bit of concern amongst your supporters. But what they aren't doing, I'm afraid, what they aren't willing to do is set out their actual plans for the country.
They don't have any.
My right honourable friend makes a very good point. Because the parties opposite, and all parties opposite, I'm afraid, again, this is the nature of the easy early years of opposition. They want the benefits of our difficult choices, but they are unwilling to say how they would pay for them. And I'm afraid I'm sick and tired of listening to the never, never from the benches opposite about where they are very confident and comfortable with the imaginarium of the budget that they believe is going to happen, but they're unwilling or incapable to come up with real and meaningful proposals. But we know some of the proposals that have been floated by the party opposite, whether that's cutting maternity pay, whether that means testing the state pension, or whether that is attacking the minimum wage. We also know what the impact of a Conservative budget means. It means the grotesque chaos of Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng's budget. I would call it a bombshell, but bombshells only go off once. And that bombshell is going off in the homes and communities across this country every single day. There are families today on 5-year mortgages or longer who would have had low interest rates now. But despite the admirable and welcome 5 interest cuts under this government, will be paying hundreds or thousands of pounds more per year. And I would simply say, in closing, to members opposite, they express concern for those invaluable homes. Many of those invaluable homes will have, understandably, significant mortgages. Many of their constituents who they are concerned about today will have seen their mortgages go up by hundreds or thousands of pounds thanks to the actions of their government that we are all still living with and which I'm afraid the cheerlead at the time. That is not imaginary, that is the real consequences of their government, and it is what we are trying to put behind us.
Deputy Speaker, the Treasury has been flying more kites than the end of Mary Poppins in the papers over the last few weeks. But if they're true, the Chancellor is preparing the most destructive raid on homeowners in living memory. Families across my constituency of Farnham and Borden are bracing themselves for new taxes on homes over £50,000, capital gain tax on family houses, a revaluation of council tax, and even a land value tax. This is not reform, this is a sledgehammer aimed squarely at aspiration, mobility and stability. And once again, it is the South and the South East that will be punished the most. In Farnham, where the average house price now exceeds £600,000, with detached homes at nearly £900,000, families could face annual bills of nearly £5,000 on top of mortgages, council tax and energy costs. In Hazelmere, Liphook and Borden, households will not be spared. These levies will strip thousands from budgets already stretched to the limit. And what of pensioners and downsizers in Greyshot, Churt, Bramshot, Tilford or Frensham? They would face the grotesque prospect of capital gains tax on their primary residence. I will do.
Thank you. He talks of pensioners. Does he agree with me that this is an extra pressure for them, given all the concern that was put upon them because of the cut to winter fuel payments?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. And once again, this government showing that it doesn't understand and doesn't value pensioners in this country and the sacrifice that they have done. Everyone, pensioners, farmers, small business owners, are seen as a cash cow for this government. And as you rightly say, I will give way.
Giving way. The Conservative government raised taxes 25 times in the last Parliament. How many of those tax rises did he oppose?
I don't want to correct the honourable gentleman, but I wasn't here to oppose or support any of those. But what I would gently remind him of, and I use the word gently because I know the honourable member on the front bench loves the word gently, so I said it twice now. But the reality was that there was a pandemic that had to be funded and dealt with. There was a war in Ukraine that had to be funded. And as we've gone back in history a bit, we had to deal with the deficit that the last Labour government left us. And that is the reality of the situation. No, I won't. No, I'm afraid I've given away a couple of times. This is a tax on the family home, and it will hit hardest those who have worked hard, saved responsibly, and played by the rules. Let us be clear, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is not simply a question of numbers on a balance sheet. It is about whether families can stay in the communities where they raise their children. It's whether pensioners can pass on their homes, and whether young people will ever see the ladder of opportunity come down again. A capital gains tax on main homes will trap people in their properties, create a locked-in market and dry up the supply of homes. Transactions will slow, chains will break, and first-time buyers, the very people Labour claimed to champion, will be shut out even further. The government has tried to defend this agenda by talking about fairness, but there is nothing fair about a pensioner in Gretham being forced to sell their family home to pay the taxman. There is nothing fair about young families in Linford choosing between childcare and a new annual property levy. And there is nothing fair about placing the heaviest burden on one region of the country simply because its housing stock is higher in value. In truth, this is a South and South East tax dressed up as national fairness. And this is part of a pattern, Madam Deputy Speaker. From scrapping the pensioner fuel allowance that my honourable friend from Bromley and Biggin Hill mentioned, to threatening VAT on private schools, to punitive business tax rises, every single decision seems to be about sending a political signal rather than supporting families or growing the economy. And the consequences are plain to see. Falling business confidence, another year of negative hiring expectations and growing unemployment. Wasn't their white paper meant to be called Get Britain Working? All we're seeing is Britain grinding to a halt. The Chancellor may talk of fairness, but she's stripping away the last sanctuary for working people, the roofs over their heads. Overtaxation without clarity will paralyse the housing market, punish my constituents and undermine economic stability. Madam Deputy Speaker, if you tax homes, you tax hope. And that is the surest way to drain ambition from our country. We should be protecting families, not forcing them to sell up. We should be supporting aspiration, not taxing it into extinction.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think it bears repeating exactly the record that we, the Labour government, had to deal with when we took over last year. We've heard, theories propounded on the relationship between tax and growth and public spending, and how if we only lowered taxes, we would enter into a glorious period of growth and even better public services. But the facts of the matter are, it has been clear to see the impact of that theory and ideology over the last 14 years. Austerity cut the engines of this economy, leaving us with public services that were not delivering for British people. Investment in our services and our country was cut, and this left us at the mercy of global shocks, meaning that we were less well prepared and less well placed to withstand them. So the upshot of that in my constituency of North East Derbyshire has been seeing GP wait lists far too long, bus routes disappear from rural villages that really need them to give opportunities and connect families across my constituency. We've seen NHS waiting lists up, whether for serious surgeries, NHS dentistry or GP access. And what this has resulted in is serious ill health issues across my constituency, a restriction of opportunity for young people, and across the whole of North East Derbyshire, a restriction on opportunity and growth for the very people that will drive growth in this economy, those who will start and drive small businesses. We've heard again and again from the benches opposite about how they support the 1%, and they have come out fighting for that 1% very hard today indeed. Now, they are saying that they're very concerned about yearly charges on people who are just starting out in life and they've just bought their first homes. And yes, I'd love to talk about charges that bear no resemblance to service, and I'm particularly referring to fleasehold and charges by estate management companies that bear no relation to the services that they provide. This is a real problem in my constituency of North East Derbyshire, and I know many of my colleagues here on the benches have also raised it repeatedly. In my constituency in Wingworth, First Port, in particular company, have repeatedly raised service charges, said that service charges are providing services that the constituents have not received, and for very spurious reasons. I've also heard about how some residents have been forced to pay for a play park when there is no play park that First Port or any other company is providing in the area. What this means is that for those who are starting out, they've got their mortgages, they've got their homes, they just want to get on and live their life, they are being subject to often thousands of pounds each year, which is not delivering the services that they deserve. I know this is a problem elsewhere. We've heard horror stories of how charges or ground rents have risen exponentially. None of these problems, which I think we can all agree is a problem, were dealt with by the previous Conservative government. I didn't notice any particular concern raised about them at the time, and I know it's an issue that we will continue to fight hard for and against on this side of the House. To conclude then, I think a really important point when we look at what this Labour government has achieved since coming into office, actually we have seen real wages rising faster than prices, the first time in a very long time. I really cannot stress how important it is that we are seeing real wages rising. 3 million people across this country have seen the minimum wage rise. This is exactly the sort of thing that led me to join the Labour Party, and is one of the most proudest things that I've seen that we've achieved, is wages for the very poorest in society going up, including those starting out on their very first job, those who are under 21. I would also like to highlight another massive achievement that we have done. We in the Labour Party believe that taxes is what you take to make sure you can deliver public services. Lower taxes and lower public services are not going to result in a better rising living standards for those across our country. Yes, we have had to make some difficult decisions, but what we have seen is the NHS waiting list falling month after month, and I know that my constituents have already started to feel that. Why? Because they have told me so.
Madam Dirprwy Llefarydd, can I refer the House to my register of financial interests? As we look forward to a budget for Christmas, as a representative of a rural agricultural community, this Labour government's last autumn budget remains a significant concern. Indeed, the wide divide between rural Wales and Westminster was made clear as day last year, when the Chancellor set out plans to restrict full inheritance tax relief from April next year to the first £1 million of combined agricultural and business property. Combining the APR and the BPR means that the asset value of the tools and the machinery necessary to operate a farm business are affected, as well as the agricultural land and property. And while the government maintains that this policy will only affect around 500 estates a year, and that the small family farms will not be affected, the Farmers Union of Wales and NFU Cymru's calculations show otherwise. And when I told the Minister of Food Security and Rural Affairs that 92% of one local accountancy firm's clients would be hit, it was totally dismissed by him. But now, even though the producers of the research used by this government to justify its plans have conceded that working farmers are more likely to suffer under the policy than the wealthy. Sorry, did you want to come in?
I thank the honourable member for giving way. Over half of UK farms have a net value of over £1.5 million. Farmers are already worried about the family farm tax and now looking at the potential tax rises that the government is floating for the upcoming budget, seeing lower rates for increased rates for inheritance tax and other forms of property taxes. These are our food producers. They are writing to me concerned about why they should continue to sow the seeds. Does she agree farmers need a break?
Oh, absolutely, and I'll come on to that in a minute. In Wales, it's between 75 and 90% of farmers are going to be affected by this, according to NFU Cymru and FUW. What's clear that this government's APR changes will not hit tax-avoiding wealthy land hoarders. Instead, it will punish working farmers in Wales whose income dropped an average of 34% last year, forcing many to sell what their parents and their grandparents have spent lifetimes building. And it's not just farm business owners either. Family Business UK figures estimate that these changes will cause 15.5 million reduction in GVA in my constituency of Caerfyrddin alone.
Order, order. Welcome to the Treasury Select Committee on Wednesday, the 3rd of September 2025. And we're here with the Governor of the Bank of England and members of the Monetary Policy Committee to discuss the recent decision by the Monetary Policy Committee on interest rates back in August, one of our regular sessions with the Governor and his team. And I'm delighted to welcome from my left to right Professor Alan Taylor, who's an external member of the Monetary Policy Committee, Claire Lombardelli, who's the Deputy Governor and a member of the Monetary Policy Committee, Andrew Bailey, of course, the Governor of the Bank of England, and Megan Green, one of the external members of the Monetary Policy Committee. So we had an interesting decision last time. One small technical thing is that you didn't use your casting vote, Governor. You had a second round of votes. Can you just tell us why you did it that way?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I've brought the legislation along, actually. So obviously, you know, the first vote led to 4 members preferring to cut by 25 basis points, 4 members preferring to hold the rate, and 1 member preferring to cut by 50. Now, the legislation says in the event of a tie, the chair shall have a second casting vote. Subject to that legislation, the committee shall determine its own procedure. So the question, of course, is that a tie or not? Now, 2 things I'll say on this. My view is there was a very clear distribution of preference for a cut. 5 members preferred a cut, 4 didn't. Obviously we could have determined it was a tie, and I could have used the casting vote, but I didn't for a couple of reasons. One is that I think it actually is, I thought it was quite sensible actually to have a second round of voting and say we'll have a constrained vote, because in a sense we know where the balance of preferences is. The second thing is that I'm conscious that this obviously, by the way, the casting vote has been used in the past, but it's been used in the context, it's been used at least once, when we only had 8 members of the committee, so it's possible to have an exact tie. Of course, it would also be possible to have a 3-3-3 tie, but we've never had that, I think. But I was also conscious that we're setting precedent here, and in this case, I personally was in the 5 that were preferring a cut, but let's say I'd been in the other side. Let's say I'd been one of the people preferring to hold. Had I used the casting vote, I would then have had a bit of a dilemma, because I could have used it to back up my own original vote, but then the outcome would have not have necessarily really reflected the balance of the distribution of votes. Or I could have used it to achieve that, in which case I would have ended up voting both ways in the 2 votes. And so I think it was a better outcome and a clearer outcome to say, let's have a second vote.
Sounds like a sort of logic problem, doesn't it? But that's partly.
That was how we got there.
I just wanted to get that procedural point out of the way, and I obviously want to come to members about their own decisions. But before we do that, there's obviously been big things happening across the Atlantic with attacks on the Federal Reserve's independence. Yeah. As the head of the Independent Bank of England, I wondered if you had any thoughts or comments to make about the impact of that, both on the global economy. This is a very serious situation. I am very concerned, because the Federal Reserve is obviously, the central bank for the world's largest economy. It's leading central bank. It has built up a very strong reputation for independence and for its decision making. So this is very concerning. And let me just make a comment on why it's concerning for me, the underpinning point, because this applies to all central banks, I think. Monetary stability and financial stability, which are our 2 objectives, underpin, I think, sort of the foundations of policy. One way of putting it is that if we do those things, we enable you then to go off and take decisions, in the areas that appropriately, governments and Parliament should take decisions in, which involve things like sort of distribution issues, knowing that the foundations are sort of sound. And I think that's important. It was very strongly the view I know of the government when the bank was made independent, certainly in respect of monetary policy. And I think what we're now seeing is people saying, well, no, actually, we should be able to trade off the sort of the foundations for those other decisions, if you like. And I'm afraid I just think that is a very dangerous road to go down. I think the job of an independent central bank is to provide those foundations, to take independent decisions to do it within the remits we're given by you, with sessions like this we're accountable to you. That's how it works, that's how it should work. And so the threats to that I take very seriously. Okay, and have you had any conversations with your counterpart in the US?
Yes, we talk regularly. I was at the Jackson Hole conference 2 weeks ago. I'll be seeing him in Basel this weekend. So no, we talk regularly, as we do normally. We always talk regularly.
Okay, Mr. John Gray, MP.
Just to kind of explain this thing about the independence of central banks to a way that my constituents would immediately grasp, would your position be that be careful what you wish for, because if you lose the independence of central banks, ultimately you will face higher prices,
yes,
higher mortgages, and higher costs of borrowing for social housing and business? Is that in simple terms?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There are costs to it, yes.
As ever, we want to drill it back to the impact on our constituents. So, to the decision. So we've got Megan Green and Claire Lombardelli, who both of you voted to hold interest rates and not to cut. So I thought I'd come to you first, just if you want to explain why you took that position. If I start with Megan Green.
Sure, thanks. As you point out, I voted to hold bank rate in August, and this was motivated by two main things. One is I think the risk of higher inflation persistence has increased. And secondly, I think the risk of weaker demand has decreased, particularly since May when we first put out and really fleshed out these scenarios. On higher inflation persistence, household and business inflation expectations have been elevated for some time now. The bank's done a bunch of research showing that actually sensitivity to inflation increases at a lower threshold than it might have previously because we've just come through a period of high inflation. So that threshold's now around 3 to 4%. We now have our inflation forecast topping out at 4%, so at the very top of that band. Much of the news that we've seen in inflation and feeding through into our inflation forecast has been in food prices, and food prices alongside energy prices tend to be highly salient for inflation expectation setting. And so there is a risk that you could get higher household inflation expectations, which could feed through into the wage setting process. There's also a risk that you could get higher business inflation expectations feeding through into the price setting process. The decision makers panel shows that firms are much more sensitive to upside surprises inflation now than they had been a few years ago. So there's some risk there. So I think the risk of higher inflation persistence is higher. We've also seen core inflation has flattened out for the past year. Higher frequency measures of underlying services inflation have flattened out for the past year. We expect services inflation to stay at 5% through this year. So there are some signs that maybe the disinflationary process is slowing down. We've also seen that a lot of the adjustment has come from sectors that are more interest rate sensitive, so that could indicate that some of the low-hanging fruit has already been picked and the last mile might be a bit tougher. On the demand side of things, we've looked at the relationship between the labor market and activity, and it's remained intact. We expect GDP growth to pick up, underlying GDP growth particularly to pick up modestly from here, so that suggests that any kind of labor market shakeout that I had been worried about before probably won't be coming. Employment intentions are still negative, but they're less negative than they had been previously, and that's from our agents. That suggests that some of the, or much of the adjustment in the labor market may have already occurred. And in May, I had actually been much more worried about trade policy uncertainty and the disinflationary implications of that on the UK economy. We have a bit less uncertainty now, so that has abated as well. So I'm more worried about higher inflation persistence, less worried about lower demand than I had been, and so I saw it appropriate to vote to hold bank rate.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Green. Claire Lombardelli.
Sure, thanks. As you say, like Megan, I voted to maintain rates at 4.25%. Similarly, because of my view of the balance of risks to inflation as we see them now, I'll try not to be too repetitive on what you've already heard, but I think let me talk a bit about inflation persistence and I'll talk a bit about activity. On inflation persistence, I mean, look, inflation is currently at 3.8%. It was 3.6 when we voted. That's obviously too high, and I would draw out a couple of similar things to Megan. There's a question about both the headline path and about the composition. So on the path, we've now had inflation quite high for people, for costs for businesses now for a number of years, since 2021, apart from a brief period last year. It's been well above target. I think that length of time has an effect, as well as the threshold effect Megan talked about in terms of perceptions and experience. There's the other thing I would draw out is this point about the composition, which I do think matters. In particular, we've been surprised by food price inflation. it is higher than we expected it to be. We expect it to continue to rise, and actually on central estimates we have it going up to about 5.5% at the end of the year. That's obviously worrying in and of itself. Food is a necessary good. This is extremely difficult for people. It also, we know, has this salience issue. People notice it more than other price rises, and so we're very conscious that people will be sort of alert to that. It's one of the reasons why we spend quite a lot of time thinking about food inflation, why we spend a lot of time talking to supermarkets and others about what they expect. So I think there's that. Now you have to balance that against the risk that underlying disinflation is continuing, has certainly over the last year. There is an open question for me when you look at the data about whether that is slowing at this point or not, and I think there's sort of risks there. If I turn to activity, and we spend a lot of time looking at sort of underlying activity rather than the kind of more volatile month-to-month data, but it's very clear that activity is sluggish in the UK economy. That's obviously a problem for prosperity and well-being. It's also a problem for inflation, and the thing that matters when you think about inflation is what is driving that and the balance between demand and supply. And Megan's talked about some of the factors, particularly around demand, and we have to be very alive to the risks of demand deteriorating. And then I think there's a particular risk about the consumption savings mix, and maybe we'll come on to talk to that. But the other thing that I think is really important here is low activity isn't necessarily an issue of demand. It could be an issue around supply, and I think there is quite a strong case to worry about supply in the UK. We know there is this long-term challenge on productivity. You know, we've seen that over a number of years. There's also evidence that the labour market is structurally changing, and that may be having an impact on supply. You know, issues around population, demography, health issues, all of that we're sort of aware of happening, retirement. We also have a long-standing issue about private sector investment in the UK, and of course that affects supply capacity. I sort of make this point because actually if you've got a more activity more constrained by supply than demand, then obviously that's putting more pressures on resources, and that has a different impact on inflation. So I think it's slightly more complicated than just saying because you've got low activity you must necessarily have a problem around demand. I think we have to think quite carefully about the balance between the two. So sort of taking all that together, I judge that maintaining a slightly higher level of restriction would put more downward pressure on inflation.
Because it's interesting, because I'll come to the Governor in a moment, because Governor, you've talked about the risk that disinflation momentum could slow as well. But before I do that, I think because Professor Taylor, you voted for a 50 basis points cut, and you know, so therefore you ended up shifting your vote. So can you explain the rationale and why you voted the way you did in the end?
Yes, I voted to cut by 50 basis points, and I think this is in the context of a view that formed in the last 6 months since I was last here speaking to you. I think in the first part of the year there was a lack of clarity both in the data and because of the uncertainty in the international situation, knowing that tariffs were coming. And there was the arrival of the predicted hump in inflation, which is now unfolding as we expected in our February forecast. So at that time I felt like I needed to wait and see and have more clarity on what tariffs were going to do and whether the labour market would continue cooling, whether wage inflation would continue to come down. And I think that became clearer as we got into May and June, particularly as we started to receive data on wage settlements. And I still think what we said a year ago or more about the crucial role of wage inflation in feeding into services inflation was the key thing for this last mile of convergence to sustainable levels of inflation at target. So I think it's about balance of risks, which have already been mentioned. It's just that I see the balance as being in the other direction than my colleagues. I'm cognizant of expectations needing to be taken into consideration. And it's true that household inflation expectations are somewhat elevated, though not dramatically relative to their historical mean and standard deviation. On the other hand, financial market inflation expectations are more benign and have actually been coming down more recently, and firm inflation expectations are in the middle. And exactly what signal-to-noise ratio those different types of inflation expectations have it is important to take into consideration. So I think on that we need to watch inflation expectations, but that for me they're not flashing red yet. Whereas if that's the main concern on the upside, I think for me on the downside it's more a constellation of risks, where multiple things could crystallise, both domestically and internationally, and that I think are all in play. So I think wage inflation is coming down. We're seeing readings for this year which are in line with our agents' prediction in their survey in January. They were predicting a number like 3.7. I think the current average in the settlements database is 3.6 for calendar year 2025. And as I think I mentioned in my previous testimony, as you go through the year, as we went through last year, those wage settlements tended to be slowing down depending as you went from January through to December. As you went through each successive month, the later settlements were coming in lower than the earlier settlements. And I speculated when I last appeared that that pattern might repeat this year, and that is what we're starting to see as we're starting to see settlements coming into the data set for the latter half of this year, and particularly in the final quarter. We're starting to see settlements around 3, 2, or even lower. And that's confirmed through more anecdotal evidence when I go out with the agents and talk to businesses. I say, what are you thinking of doing next year for your wage settlement? And I'll ask the agents, what have you been hearing about what they think will come next? And it's generally coming in the low 3s or thereabouts, and possibly lower, suggesting to me that we are completing that last mile of that trajectory. So the concern about inflation expectations has to be weighed against the actual incoming data on wages, because I think the most risky channel for the transmission of inflation expectations back into inflation, actual inflation, is through wage bargaining. But I think given the softening in the labour market, and we can come on to unemployment and the slack in the economy in due course, that risk of inflation's feeding through wage bargaining is abating as the labour market softens. I'll come into the other risks in the constellation there, but I wanted to emphasise the wage issue as the most important. I think the hump is a difficulty. I knew kind of in May and June, I looked at the hump and I said, Alan, when are you going to kind of, maybe look a bit out of line? Well, it's going to be when the hump reaches its peak, which is around now. So I have faith in the underlying disinflation process, but we've got a disturbance now, which I don't think is a manifestation of persistence from last year or 2 years ago. It was a new set of shocks that we got in January, administered prices, taxes, a little bit of an energy shock, and now some food shocks. So I think I'm trying to see through that, but this is the hardest time to do that. I think the tariff situation, we're now at the highest tariffs in the post-war period, or since the 1930s, in terms of what's happened with the new US policies. That's only just starting to manifest, I think, in what we're seeing in US data, and I think it's only going to trickle through in the next year or two into the rest of the world as trading patterns rearrange. So I'm expecting, we're seeing it in some sectors, maybe autos, a lot of cheaper goods that couldn't make it into the US market will start to wash up on our shores, on European shores, and therefore affecting us through intermediate products in their market that then filter into our prices. So I think a lot of that is coming and will be loading into the 2026 economic conditions that we face. So all of those worries are in the back of my mind. I think the tariff issue is a little bit undercooked in our baseline forecast, so there's a point of disagreement for me there. There's also a point of disagreement in terms of the current output gap or the slack in the economy, which I think is a little bit worse than our current model is suggesting, because we're putting a lot of weight on the nominal block, whereas I think the rest of the signals are saying the economy is a little bit weaker. And then, of course, lastly, I tend to think the neutral rate of interest is quite low, and so I feel we have further to go to reach neutral, which leads me to think, therefore, currently we're more restrictive, and that we're plenty restrictive enough to take the remaining underlying inflation out of the economy, and I think we're seeing that in the way the wages are developing. So overall, I'm more in the 4+1 camp in terms of how many cuts per year, maybe 4 or 5, rather than 4 minus 4 or 3. And so I think that led me to my vote.
Okay, that's very comprehensive. Thank you very much. And Governor, we've talked before here about that gentle trajectory towards the 2% target, a cut of 25 basis points. What was the reason for your decision?
Well, look, I mean, I won't repeat everything else that's been said. I'll sort of just position myself, if you don't mind, around the colleagues. So I agree with Megan and Claire that I think, well, Alan said it as well, that we have got, the risk on inflation has gone up. I think where I differ a bit is that I think I'm more concerned about the downside risk on the labour market. I think there is more evidence of some weakness in the labour market coming through. The pay number came in under where we thought it would be based on the May forecast. So I put a bit more emphasis on that downside risk. That's context. Policy, I do think, remains restrictive. That's important. It needs to. So the question then is, as Alan was saying, is how to then judge the hump. I think the causes of the hump are mainly not telling us about the underlying state of the economy, but it is inflation nonetheless. I mean, we can't get away from that. So the question is it going to create persistence risk? Well, I think context does matter here, and this is where my concern about the potential weakening of the labour market is relevant. So for me, I think the judgment was this. I thought it was appropriate, given that downside risk, that we did a further 25 basis points. But I think I also thought it was appropriate that we gave a message which focused on this inflation risk. And what that really turns into is a judgment that although we've taken a further step, and although I think that the path will continue to be downwards gradually over time because policy is still restrictive, there is now considerably more doubt about exactly when and how quickly we can make those further steps. That's the message I wanted to get across. Now, I think actually, judging by what's happened certainly to market pricing since then, I think that message has landed.
Okay, well, thank you all for your comprehensive answers. Always helpful to have flesh out the official minutes. Chris Coughlin, MP.
Thank you, Chair. From what you've all been saying, if I'm reading correctly, I'd say, with the exception of Professor Taylor, it appears that growth and inflation risks have decoupled, perhaps. So I'd be curious about your views of, is the UK stuck in stagflation?
Well, I'd be happy to start on that. I mean, stagflation is not a word I tend to use because I think it's not a word that is has a very clear meaning. So let's take the two parts to it: inflation and growth. We've all talked about the inflation hump, so that's, in a sense, I'm not going to repeat that. There is obviously an upturn in inflation. By the way, the hump is about 0.3% of a percentage point higher than we thought it would be, both in May and in February, actually. So that's the sort of dimension of it. On the growth side, I think come back to what Claire was saying. Claire made a really important point that the risk here is actually on the supply side. It's on potential growth. It's not so much on the demand. And the way of kind of really putting a sort of sense around that is that we think that the potential growth rate of the economy is currently around about 1.5%, and has been, by the way, for some. This is a description of most of the time since the financial crisis. Hasn't quite been that level, but that's a broad description of it. Prior to that, it was about 2.5%. So that 1% reduction in the potential growth rate is significant, and it's significant not just for monetary policy, but frankly it's significant for other areas of policy. It's very important, and as Claire said, you can trace this back to both productivity, which has been weak, and has been weak really since that point about 15 years ago, and the other contribution to potential growth, which is the growth of the labour force over time. The question of the increase in the average age of the population is very significant, and it's a point I talked about at Jackson Hole. I think we all know it's happening, but I don't think it really features enough in the sort of the discussion of the issues around policy. It is very significant. Now, as long as we have those two sort of, if you like, sort of things restricting the potential growth rate, then we have got this tension. I think the tension runs through policy. And so I would say, again, it's very important, as Claire said, that, and it's not, of course, really for us then, but these supply side issues are the focus, really, of attention in policy making more broadly.
Does anyone else have any views on the stagflation point?
I mean, the only thing I would add is we're not in stagflation, and actually it links to the original answer that Andrew, the governor, gave in response to the independence question. Our target is 2%, and we will get inflation sustainably back to 2%, and we'll take the action needed to do that. And as discussed, we do have growth, 1.5%. So that is growth. It is not as strong as we would all like it to be, but we are seeing growth, and we are taking action to bring inflation down.
But of course, financial market expectations of inflation are consistently higher than the expectations of the bank. Does that ultimately undermine the credibility of the MPC?
Financial market expectations for inflation are well anchored actually around our target, and that is an important thing, and it comes again to this point about credibility, which is a key part of our the structure that we have in the UK. So, actually we are seeing those expectations anchored. When we look at inflation expectations, what we are seeing is we have seen on the short term expectations of households, to a lesser extent businesses, we're seeing some movement there, but as Professor Taylor said, they're quite small by historical standards, but of course because they're so important to the inflation formation process, we look at them really, really carefully.
I just add on a very basic level, if you look at our forecast, we have growth and underlying growth picking up from next year through the forecast period, and inflation coming down towards our targets, so that we're not forecasting stagflation.
Sure. And there's been a lot of concern in the news at the moment about high bond yields. I'd be curious to know your views on why you think that the UK currently has higher bond yields than France, even though France's debt to GDP ratio is higher, and actually the French government is at risk of collapse.
Well, we've got quite a substantially higher short-term interest rate than France, because France obviously is anchored by the ECB's rate, which is 2% currently. So that's an important point. Having said that, I mean, you've seen a steepening of yield curves across the whole developed world, really. So I do think two points I'll make on this. First of all, the underlying driver of this is global. Indeed, when you look at UK yields in terms of the steepening, we're actually about in the middle of the pack. So Germany and Japan have gone up considerably more than us. US less than us. We're in the middle in that sense. I think France has steepened quite a bit more. They've got their own obviously well-known issues. Yeah. That's the first point I'll make. Now, on that point, going back to my previous answer to the earlier the previous question you asked, of course, that does bring these supply side issues into sort of sharp relief. This question about the potential growth rate, particularly in the context of fiscal policy. The second point I'll make is that I do think it's important not to over-focus on the 30-year bond rate. Of course, it's a number that gets quoted a lot. It's quite a high number. It is actually not a number that is being used for funding, at all at the moment, actually. Historically, the UK has, because it was a very sensible policy, which Claire was actually heavily involved in doing, of course, to lengthen the maturity of the UK debt stock. And there's real benefits of doing that. It was possible to do that while structurally, particularly the defined benefit pension world, these schemes were sort of still growing and they were demanding those sorts of assets. They're mostly now mature schemes, and this comes back to the ageing of the population, actually. Yeah. So the structural demand for long-dated, long maturity bonds has gone down. And I think sensibly the Debt Management Office has actually shortened the profile of their issuance to reflect that. So there's a danger that we get sort of slightly overly focused on long yields. Because just to end with one fact, I think when you look, I'm not, Debt Management Office are the experts on this, I think when you look at the cost of debt issuance in the course of this year, overall, the average cost of debt issuance is at least flat and possibly slightly down. And that's because if you look at the 5-year rate, which is much more tied to our decisions, it's actually gone down. So there's a lot of rather sort of, if you don't mind, dramatic commentary on this going on. I wouldn't exaggerate the 30-year bond rate.
Okay. Thank you. Bobby Dean, MP.
Thank you. I think I'll actually start with a preliminary question, if I can, because Professor Taylor, you mentioned about where you think the neutral rate is, and you're at the low end. And I just wondered if each of you could give me a sense whether you have a number in your head about what the neutral rate is, or whether you judge that as it goes, and if there is kind of any discrepancy between you as a panel, really. Could I start from right to left? So Megan Green first.
Yeah, sure. So trying to pinpoint where our star is a losing game. It's impossible to observe. It's impossible to measure that specifically. So, we've put out a few boxes in monetary policy reports providing ranges. I think the important thing to note is that there are a lot of reasons to think that the neutral rate may have gone up over the past number of years. So I think it's higher than it was. I could give you a number, but it wouldn't mean much more than anybody else's number, which is to say not a huge amount. I do think, though, that rather than coming up with a specific number for R-star and trying to judge how restrictive you are on that basis, there are other ways to measure how restrictive monetary policy might be. And one way is looking at the monetary transmission mechanism, how much of policy has come through, how much is still to come through, and observing how much monetary policy is bearing on the real economy. And I think there are indications that we're still restrictive, but I'm not convinced that we're meaningfully restrictive. We've been in a rate cutting cycle for a year now, so it can't go on forever with us also being restrictive, and I think we're getting closer, which is an obvious statement in many ways because bank rate is coming down. But
well, I think I can confidently predict as you go down the line, you'll probably realise there are differences, quite important sort of philosophical differences of view on this question as to whether we know what R-star is. I'm actually pretty close to where Megan has just described, so I won't repeat everything she said. I really agree with Megan that I use far more the approach of saying how restrictive are we judging by the monetary transmission mechanism. I think we're probably a bit more restrictive than Megan thinks we are. One of the and just to draw out one point there, the mortgage market is obviously a very important part of that story, and because of course we've switched to having a mortgage market which has gone from a variable rate to sort of 5 to 7 year fixed rates, it means that the transmission mechanism takes longer. So this sort of question about how restrictive we are does adjust over time. I think we said in the box, we're probably past peak restriction now. That's not surprising because we've been cutting rates, but because of the lag, it takes longer to get to that peak point. So I think we're past peak restriction. I'm probably, though, my difference with Megan is I think we're a bit more restrictive than Megan thinks we are, but we're basically in the same sort of philosophical camp, I think.
Sure. I mean, actually, I'm in a very similar position to Megan, I would say, which is, I think, and on this philosophical point, I mean, like the Governor and Megan have said, I mean, I think you can look at this in two ways. You can do the sort of model-based analysis, and you can do the sort of what does the data and sort of, as you think about the analysis of what we're actually seeing in the economy, what do those things tell you together? We do both to try and understand this and to try and get as much information as we can. I tend to put more weight on the evidence of what is happening in the economy, and personally, I think it is basically impossible to know sort of what the neutral rate is, certainly in real time at the point at which you're making your policy. So there's a lot of uncertainty around this, but I think I would put myself, closer to Megan in that I would put myself at the upper end of the sort of range that the bank has set out. Analytically, we've said it's somewhere between 2 to 4. I'd be surprised. I would think I'm more likely in the upper half of that. But very, very hard to know, and so but it's one of those issues that we debate and discuss and put a lot of effort into.
I kind of wasn't expecting a number from each of you, to be honest, but it's just interesting here because of what you said, Professor Taylor. Because for me, if you feel like because obviously the restriction has an impact on the economy too, right? As you know,
yes.
And so if you feel like we're too restricted at this moment because we're too far away from where we need to end up being, you may feel like now is the time for more urgent action to get towards that place. And I don't know, Professor Taylor, if you could elaborate what you meant when you said that, and if you feel that because of the things that you've already described about how a lot of the inflation stuff that you think is driving it will dissipate over time, that now's the time to act faster. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I think that was very much part of my thinking, that if I saw a greater weight of downside risks and that I felt, based on my estimate of neutral, that we were more restrictive than maybe my colleagues, then I felt we had more space for an extra cut this year, and I thought the extra cut was justified on insurance grounds when I saw that constellation of risks building. So yeah, I think that contributed to my feeling that we had quite a bit of space left to run.
Okay. Then the other thing that I've picked up in the discussion, you've all talked about sort of the supply side as well. Is that a signal to government to do particular things as well? Because the tools that you've got obviously are quite blunt. You have the interest rate, you've got QE and QT as well. That's the armoury you've got when it comes to monetary policy. Is there anything you would like to see, or are there any thing that you'd like the bank to have more control over, really? I'm trying to understand whether or not you feel like you've got the tools you need to do your monetary job. And I know it's going to be hard for you to answer.
Not in the market for more control. Look, I think, and by the way, these issues, as I said earlier, are not unique. I think it's really important. This is not unique to one government. These have been going on for some time. I mean, John Glenn and I have discussed these in the past many times. So I think, look, I'll come back to the points we've made before. Two things. On the productivity side, I mean, it is important because productivity in this country has been weak now for quite a long time. Investment is an important part of that story. So I think things that the government is doing, and by the way, the previous government was also doing, because there's no difference here on things like pensions reform, I think are important. Things we did on long-term investment in the past, which we were though involved in, are important because these are the things that can create the ability to improve investment in the economy. So that's one thing. The second thing on the ageing of the population, and again, look, the UK is, I mean, all developed countries are in the same place. So there's nothing unique about the UK in this respect at all. I just would say, I do think it's important to have these issues thoroughly on the table and to make sure that they're sort of well understood, not just in this building, but more generally, because I think the importance of this issue as a headwind, a structural headwind, it is critical. I mean, it is a very important issue in terms of not just in terms of both of the the labour force, and in terms of the cost of health and welfare.
And can I take from that you don't think it's central enough to public discussion at the moment? That this demographic problem we have in ageing society, you don't think it's central enough to our public discussion?
I think. Look, I'm going to stop because I'm getting very near to the edge of my remit, as it were. All I will say is, and of course you're very keen to get me onto that. But look, I would say this: I do think it's important to explain the underlying issues. It's really important to explain the underlying issues here, and they affect us obviously, but they're not for us to to take on the responsibility for.
Do any others want to add to that? No, I'll probably tempt you outside your remit, that's fine.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to now adjourn because we're expecting a vote, so order.
Hasta que ya se abre la puerta segundos para hacer Assent, nos van a poner el coche. Yo voy a necesitar eso. Aquí no molesto, ¿no? No, pero no hace falta el... Si yo voy te lo paso. Ah, bueno. Parece que no es para no fastidiar el plano a esta gente. Me ha parecido que estuviera rezando, ¿no? ¿Te imaginas?
Please. Well, Prime Minister, Pedro, my friend, it is a real privilege to have you here at Downing Street, something that you and I have spoken about ever since I was elected, and to be able to have the pleasure to sit down with you today is great. And all the more so because I could not believe that it's been 7 years since there's been a Prime Minister meeting here in Downing Street. So it is really good that we are able to have this meeting. I'm very pleased that it's you and me having this meeting after 7 years because of the closeness of our friendship as well as the closeness of our countries. And we've got so much to talk about. Let's start with the people to people, the millions of people that come from my country to your country, and all the business contacts as well. That people to people contact is incredible and really, really valuable. And then we've got trade, we've got a lot of defence work to discuss, Ukraine and the global situation, the terrible situation in Gaza. And of course, we're here today to sign a bilateral agreement on the back of all the hard work we did on Gibraltar. So it really is a very important day for me and my government to welcome you here, and I much look forward to the discussions we'll have this afternoon.
Well, thank you very much, Keir, my friend, and Prime Minister Starmer, and also for the Spanish government is very important, this visit. As you mentioned before, 7 years. It's quite a long time for official visit, a bilateral meeting between the Prime Minister of the UK and the Prime Minister of Spain. So thank you very much for your kind words. Thank you very much for the warm hospitality on behalf of the Spanish delegation. And I would like also to commend the leadership of Prime Minister Starmer when it comes to having closed successfully this very important agreement between Spain, the UK, and the European Commission regarding Gibraltar, and also how the British government reset its relation with the European Union, which is also very important for Spain. So we are two governments aligned on many issues, on many policies. As Prime Minister Starmer has said, we're going to sign a very important bilateral agreement which will strengthen our cooperation and collaboration on many topics, gender equality, sustainable development, green energy transition, and so on and so forth. And last but not least, I think that we are very much aligned on global debates such as climate change, Ukraine, or the terrible tragedy, the situation that we're facing in Gaza. So happy to be here, Prime Minister. Thank you very much, my dear friend. I'm looking forward to strengthening this cooperation and this friendship.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please. Thank you. Well, Prime Minister, Pedro, my friend, it is a real privilege to have you here at Downing Street, something that you and I have spoken about ever since I was elected, and to be able to have the pleasure to sit down with you today is great. And all the more so because I could not believe that it's been 7 years since there's been a Prime Minister meeting here in Downing Street. So it is really good that we are
able to have this meeting. I'm very pleased that it's you and me having this meeting after 7 years, because the closeness of our friendship as well as the closeness of our countries, and we've got so much to talk about. Let's start with the people to people, the millions of people that come from my country to your country, and all the business contacts as well. That people to people contact is incredible and really, really valuable. And then we've got trade, we've got a lot of defence work to discuss, Ukraine and the global situation, the terrible situation in Gaza. And of course, we're here today to sign a bilateral agreement on the back of all the hard work we did on Gibraltar. So it really is a very important day for me and my government to welcome you here, and I much look forward to the discussions we'll have this afternoon.
Well, thank you very much, Keir, my friend, and Prime Minister Starmer, and also for the Spanish government is very important, this visit. As you mentioned before, 7 years. It's quite a long time for official visit, a bilateral meeting between the Prime Minister of the UK and the Prime Minister of Spain. So thank you very much for your kind words. Thank you very much for the warm hospitality on behalf of the Spanish delegation. And I would like also to commend the leadership of Prime Minister Starmer when it comes to having closed successfully this very important agreement between Spain, the UK, and the European Commission regarding Gibraltar, and also how the British government reset its relation with the European Union, which is also very important for Spain. So we are two governments aligned on many issues, on many policies. As Prime Minister Starmer has said, we're going to sign a very important bilateral agreement which will strengthen our cooperation and collaboration on many topics, gender equality, sustainable development, green energy transition, and so on and so forth. And last but not least, I think that we are very much aligned on global debates such as climate change, Ukraine, or the terrible tragedy, the situation that we are facing in Gaza. So happy to be here, Prime Minister. Thank you very much, my dear friend, and looking forward to strengthening this cooperation and this friendship.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nico.
Thank you.